Hi, Graham Sampson. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Hi, hello to you. Thanks for having me.
For anybody who doesn't know who Graham Sampson is, this is a little bit of a clue. Brilliant, great intro. And of course, the Smyths are the numero uno celebrated tribute band for the Smyths. And you've been around since 2004, Graham, haven't you? So can you tell us a little bit about you forming back in 2004 and the background as to why?
Yeah, so back then, essentially, what happened is myself and Simon Hudson, who is the bass player for us, or the sort of founding member as well of the band. He and I had been in various bands together, well, a couple of bands in the mid '90s, and we had a few near misses, in terms of almost getting signed or whatever, getting swept up into the euphoria of Britpop and what have you. We were in a band called Ted that was doing all of the right things around 96, 97 and got picked up by the Enemy and such like. And labels were sniffing around. We had professional management. And then sort of things just didn't turn out as hoped for. So we got to the early part of sort of 2000, 2002. Simon had, just as a little side interest thing, because Simon always likes to keep busy with new things, he'd done a tribute to the Beautiful South and the House Martins called the Beautiful South Martins, and that had culminated in not only them performing at half-time on the pitch at Hull City FC, but also playing, I think, Hull City Town Hall. And once they'd done that, and I think they'd had the drummer from the House Martins actually do the show with them, so they felt they'd taken that as far as that could go, and that were around were the tributes to the Stones, the Beatles, ABBA. Though there was a brilliant Jam tribute called the Jam with 2 M's. And they were pretty much a sort of a role model, but I'll come to that. So what happened is when Simon and I had thought at that time that our original music careers had ended, but we still had a desire to perform. We enjoyed playing live and we felt we had something to give them because of Simon's experience with the Beautiful South Martins, and the fact that it had a Smyths tribute whilst he'd been at Newcastle University, which was that under the same name. And so he and a friend rekindled the idea. And that friend, Chris, said to Simon, well, that's great, but we're going to need a Morrissey, do you know one? And Simon said, well, yes, I do, because Graham, who I've been in the bands with, as a bit of a party piece, can impersonate Morrissey spoken, and I think can sing like him. I think he can get that voice. So Simon came to me and mentioned it, and I was quite excited about the prospect because I just wanted to get back to doing gigs. And this was long before the time of what we do now call the DIY musician, in terms of you feeling as an original artist that you still had an outlet. So I wanted to get back onto stage, and this seemed brilliant. And Simon and myself are big, passionate Smyths fans. We were lucky to have grown up with them at exactly the right time. I was a teenager in the 80s. I got to see the Smyths. I had the joy of being able to tune into John Peel and hear the new Smith single being played. I was able to buy it on the day of release. I was able to buy the album on the day of release. So I was there at the time. And so this was about taking a passion for the Smiths and the ability to perform it live based on what Simon had done with his previous tribute. So it was not about being a tribute band for the sake of being a tribute band, which I would have and still would have no interest in whatsoever. And some people, would regard that being in a successful tribute band can there is a sort of tribute band gravy train.
Yes.
Well, there certainly wasn't then, and it certainly wasn't our thinking. It was purely that we were Smiths fans who were in a Smiths band, performing the music of the Smiths as passionately, as honestly as we could. And to underline that, once we had got the band together and found the individuals who had the right chemistry, and that was quite an easy process, to be honest. We then, and it's the band as known now. So Andy, who is our Johnny Marr, Simon had done some shows with him in the Beautiful South Martins. Andy, I think himself had met Tom, who's their drummer, because I think they'd both gone for an audition for a Coldplay tribute. So I think for both of them, perhaps tributes was something more that they would, because Tom had also been in a Queen tribute, I think Killer Queen, I think. So they had more experience of that. I was just an original artist coming to it for the first time. But we got together in the summer of, in a rehearsal studio in London Bridge in the summer, June 2003. And so that's now 18 and a half years ago. And from the word go, we just knew it was going to work. But once we decided we were going to do this, we spent 9 months rehearsing before the show that we had booked in at the Half Moon in Putney in the March of 2004. Because as Smiths fans ourselves, we had demands on ourselves on how good it had to be. You know, this was never going to be a tribute band that was old guys with wigs and funny accessories. It was as distant from that as possible. And I think the ethos that we've always maintained is that we are alternative musicians playing the music of perhaps the ultimate alternative band. And in terms of the sound that we went for, Simon and I were always of the opinion that but for a band member who didn't board a plane, and the Smiths subsequently didn't go on a US tour, and they fell apart. In our mind, they were about to become the next British band who were going to become absolutely stellar. You know, we'd seen that U2 and Simple Minds had gone to the States, and that Smiths were next. They were going to be a stadium band. And so we thought, well, what would the Smiths sound like now? All those years later, this was 2003, so we're still talking, 16 years after the band had split up. And we felt that their sound would have been bigger and more epic. So our ethos too was, it was about the Smiths live, not replicating the sound of the Smiths on record, you know, because that's it just, you know, it just was, that was our USP, and I think it remains our USP. We have a very muscular sort of sound. So that was how the band came about, really. It was simply a desire to take our experience as live musicians and channel it into something we loved. And this band and all of the success that has followed has simply been success following passion. And for me, that's an ethos in terms of everything I do in terms of conducting my life, that you have to do something for the love of it. And you hope that the rest will follow. But if you're loving what you do and you have an integrity and an honesty, then that in itself is a good place to be.
Absolutely. And having seen you live very recently in Bridport, everything you say is absolutely spot on. It was an amazing evening. It was an amazing performance. It was an amazing, we'll come on to this in a minute, the reconstruction of the Smiths. I wasn't fortunate enough to see the Smiths live, but I've seen Morrissey at the London Palladium in 2011. Obviously, it's a completely different scenario, but you know, my friends have, and I'd love to have been able to have done it, but for whatever reason at the time, I never got that chance. But I was there in WH Smith in 1984, the day that the eponymous album came out, queuing and buying it, and I've been in love with them ever since. This isn't about me. I'm just sort of setting some sort of groundwork, but it's very interesting in terms of what you say about what would have happened if the Smiths had stayed together, gone to America, and become this U2-esque stadium band. I've never thought of that before, and thinking back on it now, my first reaction is, oh, thank goodness they didn't.
Sure.
Because those 4 years, 83 to 87, I think now for a true Smiths fan, are gems. And the idea that we would look back on the Smiths, who maybe they lasted another 10 years and they had done the American thing and they become a little bit more like the Clash did towards the end of their career, let's say.
Mm.
It does taint, because it's almost like every note and every syllable in those 4 years are jewels.
I absolutely, I totally agree that they're sort of, they're like those people who die at 27. You know, they will not grow old. They are perfect. They are preserved in amber, if that's the right substance. And I think you see the success of Morrissey in the States and the size of places that he plays. It wouldn't have been that the band caught it. It would have just been a consequence of the fact that that number of people would have wanted to have seen them. You know, that they would not have set out to become a stadium band. It simply would have been, the promoters would have said, listen guys, 100,000 people in wherever want to see you. You can either play 10 nights at this one, or you're going to have to do one show. I mean, I guess that's the consequence of it. And maybe something would have been lost. And the fact that they therefore remain as this sort of peculiarly British box bedroom, you know,
Yes.
outfit, and not this sort of entity of galactic proportions. The reputation and their legacy has done that for them,
Yeah.
but our memories of them are still preserved in venues of a human scale.
And I think the classic example possibly here is the fact that for your encore, when you did How Soon Is Now, that possibly became, or it has become, what would have happened, because
Mm,
How Soon Is Now has become very big. It's a track that the audience demand.
mm, mm,
You left it to the encore for a reason, but it's possible, like you say, that the pressure upon Morrissey Ma, etc., would have been that they would have become more normal, which would have undermined, for example, the idiosyncratic nature of How Soon Is Now, as an example.
I mean, it's that strange thing. If you take the trajectory of U2, where you know you've gone from the Unforgettable Fire, which has still got that kind of domestic feeling to it, it's still grounded in its location, and then you've got the Joshua Tree, and suddenly it's blown out. What does this mean to the people of Britain? It's about a romance with America, and where the streets have no name. And then they themselves, the band, have to look at themselves and kind of go, perhaps we're becoming blown up and fatuous. So what do we do? Well, let's take the path that Bowie did when he was blowing up in America. Where did he go? Let's go to Berlin. And obviously Achtung Baby was a chance for the band to kind of go, we need to feel like humans again. We
Yes.
need a connection with something that's um, not on the same sort of scale. And I'm guessing the Smiths may well have had to have done something just like that. They may have found themselves trapped in an environment that was not in keeping with from which they'd come, which made no real sense of that kind of down at heel, you know, wet, damp Northern Street, you know,
Yes.
background. Suddenly it's sun kissed and what have you, and we've seen it with Morrissey, but in a sense, it is more understandable because I think you could say that if there were two echoes of the past around the Smiths, you could say that the Smiths and the Beatles have similarities, and that Morrissey sort of then, in terms of coming into America, has almost become a sort of latter-day Elvis Presley figure. Now, these are two bands that are referenced by the band, perhaps Beatles more by Johnny, but Morrissey, we know that. I mean, Elvis appears on the cover of a single, so that sort of makes more sense. That's absolutely fine. And then I think, you know, the Morrissey culminating in Morrissey doing the residency in Vegas, that's absolutely fine. That's part of the narrative. That's part of the journey. That's part of the expected story for me, I think. But the Smiths kind of, you know, doing that one, it sort of doesn't make sense. It's just lovely that the kind of, we don't have to worry. It didn't happen, and that the Smiths remain
Yes.
this beautiful domestic treasure.
Yeah. I mean, the only time I saw U2 was on the Zeropa tour at Wembley Stadium, and he built into the gig Mr. Mistopheles talking to Princess Diana on the phone, or talking to Nelson Mandela or whoever it is that he happened to choose for that particular gig. And the, the idea that, you know, Morrissey would have been somehow pressurized into creating this more spectacular,
Yeah,
it just,
culminating with a phone call to the Pope. Yeah, it's pompous. Yeah, it's pompous beyond, you
yeah,
know,
absolutely, absolutely.
compare.
No, thank you for that. That is really, really interesting. Um, yeah, it is fascinating because I've never actually contemplated what it would have been like, you know, that next step. And you know, you're thinking about, obviously, you know, all the the media attention being on the fact that over the years they've been offered huge sums of money to come back together. At the same time, thinking about the reasons that they actually ended up stopping, bearing in mind that, you know, so much of the sacking of the managers continuously,
Yeah,
passing the responsibility onto Johnny Marr to effectively be
absolutely.
managing the band, and the pressure that he was under. You know, you can understand why in the end he decided, I've had enough of this. I've got to walk away.
And we know that it would have simply just continued, because it has continued in the solo career of Morrissey. You know, I have a theory about Morrissey that he is a self-saboteur, that his comfort place is where he feels that he's being wronged, where every time he's got to a pinnacle, he has chopped off his own legs. He did it with the Smyths. And then in terms of his sort of solo career, he continues to blow himself up in order to come back and feel that the world is against him, in order to build up again. You know, the solo career, stage one, culminates in the brilliance of Vauxhall and I, which to my mind compares with everything that had gone before. And he blows himself up. I think Rush releases 2 albums that I think, you know, the Odd Track or whatever do not compare. He then goes away, perhaps slightly soiled or sullied by those releases, and then comes back and does exactly what he should do as a sort of now an emerging elder statesman musician, i.e. in terms of You Are the Quarry. Checking myself, that is the album title, isn't it? Forgive me.
Yeah.
And there's kind of with guest artists and what have you, because elder statesmen have done this. I think Tom Jones had done the Loaded album, you know, and he'd reinvented himself and was performing with people like, hell yeah, we're young and we're fresh, but we want to perform with Tom Jones. And Morrissey was at that stage where everyone and anyone would have wanted to perform him. And I think there was that pinnacle, and then he sort of, I think, chopped himself down again with lesser releases, perhaps. And he's perhaps in that sort of process, I don't know, a process again. And we find that yeah, every time I'm on the search for a record label, and, you know, I've been dropped by another record label, and, you know, blah blah blah. And it's almost like it's a mechanism for him to go away and rebuild and regenerate, and then come out with another, you know, a new album on yet another label, and etc. etc. And it just repeats itself.
Yes.
It just repeats itself, and it would just happen with the Smiths. They would, or just forever, been searching for, you know, stable management, because had they had stable management, they probably would not have split up, because a strong manager that they all trusted and respected would have said, guys, take 6 weeks off. Johnny, go and do some of the things you want to do. Stephen, let him. He's coming back to you, you know, but go and have a holiday. This idea of you go and you make an album, and the moment you've delivered it to us, you go off and you make another single. Rough Trade were talking about how very difficult it was, that they weren't able to ever allow a release to breathe, because the Smiths had just suddenly come back and said, we've got a new single, or we've got a new album. And it was just breathless. Okay, now what we're left with is this remarkable catalogue over 4 years. It's brilliant, but that was a recipe for you know, a short lifespan,
Yes.
because they were just not stopping. So yeah, what might have been again.
Yeah, and also looking back at it retrospectively, you know, you've obviously had Johnny went straight to Matt at the. He went with Bernard Sumner obviously from New Order. So he was actually starting to flower. He was able to do things that actually he felt he couldn't do with the Smiths because of all the reasons that you just identified. And also you do get the sense sometimes for various reasons, whether it's to do with sexuality, whether it's to do with the autistic spectrum or whatever, that Morrissey in himself is almost determined to be enigmatic. That must be very, very difficult to be alongside for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've always admired the fact that he has kind of kept that up, and whether people have thought that certain things about him were obvious or not, the fact that it's never been confirmed, I still think is very interesting, because whichever way it falls, once it's like once the wrapping is unwrapped and you see what's in the box, okay, you move on to the next thing. So he's never unwrapped the box, so everyone's still wondering what's in it, and I think that's excellent.
Yes,
You know,
and it has certain similarities, I think, with major icons in music
yeah,
like Bob Dylan, for example. You know, certainly in the last 40 years, you know, he's kept very much himself. People like Leonard Cohen, etc., etc. They haven't come out there and exposed themselves, which for their deep entrenched fan is exactly what they want. They don't want that
exactly.
box open to the public.
Yeah, and I think time has caught up nicely with that view, because most people would now say, well, whose business is it? It really does not matter. And so apart from some sort of scurrilous tabloid hacks, it really is of interest to nobody, you know.
Yeah. Let's bring it back to you guys now, the Smyths, because this is what it's all about. But you've set a beautiful backdrop, and thank you so much. In terms of the lyrics themselves, I mean, we can go through the eponymous album right through to Strange Ways. I mean, they're just, as I said before, they are full of absolute gems. And I think one of the things that is perceived to be attractive, especially to adolescent male and female, especially back in the 80s, was the construction of the words, in that, you know, you almost need to have at least an A level in English literature to start to appreciate them, because
Yeah,
you talk to people, for example, who say, oh, the Smiths are depressing, and in the early days I just became really defensive. Now I just think, I'm sorry, but the problem that you have is that you've never found the key to unlock the door. And the chances are that this age, you're not going to find that key to unlock the door. So let's not get into any discussion or heated debate about it. Because
sure.
you look through those songs, and I know you've identified yourself with songs like I Know It's Over, and which I absolutely adore, and songs like Cemetery Gates, which is absolutely brilliant, just going on about the, you know, the plagiarism that exists. But it goes back to his pre-Smith days, when he had, I can't remember her name, but he had this friend, and they used to meet up at
Linda,
some.
Linda
Linda, thank you,
Sterling, yeah.
thank you, yeah, Linda Sterling, thank you. I've watched the film as well. It's a brilliant film. And they just used to wander around the cemeteries, you know, in Manchester, and just look at the gravestones, you know, and it's just a story being told about real life. Because I do the same. I'm attracted to, I don't know why, but I'm attracted to graveyards and cemeteries. And sometimes, you know, I'll go there and it's just peaceful, but it's also sad. And
Yeah,
it also makes you, sorry, it also makes you wonder about, you know, these people's lives and the direction that they took, and all that sort of stuff. So it's just great.
I think, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time I went to Paris in my early 20s, you know, I had to hit the three major cemeteries, you know,
Yeah, cheers.
starting with Père Lachaise, you know, I think I started with Montmartre, then I went to Montparnasse and finished with the Epic, you know. And I suppose it was it was a destination for all Smiths fans, you know, people scrawling Morrissey on Oscar Wilde's tomb, which is, you
Yes,
know,
of course.
which I think is beautiful, that fact that already he's being, you know, woven into the story of his heroes, which I think is always nice. And
Yeah.
that sort of subsequently happened to us. I didn't expect to make that segue, but we've appeared in some books about Smiths now. So yeah, when you are woven into, but I think it is that. I think also just that kind of that's what people of an alternative persuasion do. People who, because you know, yeah, I mean, I remember at the time I was listening to the Smiths, but I was reading Thomas Hardy for my A level, and Thomas Hardy was someone who, quite similar to Morrissey in a sense, is kind of like he could only ever love his wife once she was dead. He could only ever appreciate something when it was gone, and then he could mourn it. When something was there to be enjoyed at the time, you know, really wasn't quite interested. So yeah, I liked that, and I think that, you know, that fact with Morrissey and the Smiths and the songs, that death is always at one's elbow as in life. But that thing about, I mean, it's legendary. I mean, I think there's a recent anecdote with your man, the comedian who presents 8 Out of 10 Cats, who I think James O'Brien recently played next circus. I think he'd just done a podcast with that, you know, the comedian with the I'm trying to think what his name is. Jimmy Carr. And he'd subsequently referenced Morrissey. I can't remember whether it was in a book or something, and he had to ask Morrissey permission. I think he'd referenced the line, and he said he got a really wonderful reply back from him. And then Jimmy Carr went on to explain that, you know, how funny Morrissey was, and he was a defender of those lyrics. And I remember, I mean, back to 1987, the Smiths had split up, and I think in September the South Bank show had done the documentary on the Smiths, and there was John Peel saying that he got quite angry with people saying that the Smiths were miserable, because they absolutely weren't. They're hilarious. And Morrissey continues to be tongue-in-cheek, you know, hilarious. Aside from some of the other things that he may speak of, he is still very funny. He has a black sense of humor, and I think, you know, and that runs through the Smiths. And I found that interesting about The Queen is Dead, because The Queen is Dead was a culmination of everything that had been in the Smiths world coming together, because there was still the themes of kind of human suffering and wanting and longing, mixed in with poking fun at religion or the royal, you know, and yet it was had a sort of punk-like Sex Pistols, The Queen is Dead kind of follow-on from Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen. And yet it was very funny, because Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others is simply Carry On Cleo. It has to be. I'm thinking of Sid James and Amanda Barry when that song came. Of course he did, you know, and he opens A Crate of Ale and Who I Say, and it's just all there. And the Carry On genre is absolutely part of the Smiths world. But Morrissey is very, very, very funny. I think you know, all of the interviews are littered with, I mean, it's just it's the full human experience, both he and the words that he writes, that there is love and there is hate and there is comedy and there is drama and there is pathos. It's all there. And he is every bit as funny as he is maudlin or introspective, you know. Yes. And those songs are that, yeah.
And that's life, isn't it? That's just summing up life. I don't know if you can see the cat coming through.
Wonderful addition.
His name is Morrissey.
Well done.
He's just visiting. He's just passing through while you're licking my beard, Moles. Yeah, no, absolutely. But you just explained it so well in probably 5 minutes. But I'm not sure that a person who calls the Smiths and Morrissey's songs depressing would hang around for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just lazy. They've possibly never heard a Smith song, exactly. And they've just, you know, they've seen a title Heaven Knows and Miserable Now, and they just think that's, you know, that's where it is, and that's absolutely fine. They can go off and love Shack Attack and Shalimar, George Benson.
Absolutely, Graham, absolutely.
Maze with Frankie Beverly.
Next question, I wanted to send you the questions, was what members, who in the original band have you met?
Well, I was about to say, if you consider the Smiths as 5 with Stephen Street, then right. Okay, because he's a very good friend now of our band, and me personally. But we've met a fair few times now, Rourke and Joyce. This was through their sort of DJing And what happened, so quite early on, I think around 2005, 2006, we found ourselves doing a couple of shows where promoters decided that they would have one or other or both do a DJ set following our show. So we were actually going on stage and performing songs that were theirs, and with them in attendance, no pressure. And then we also, there was a book launch. There was it was a friend of ours, chap, I think it was Phil Gartside. I have not seen him because he moved to the States, but Phil wrote a book called Panic on the Streets of London, I think. And it was a sort of, it was a book that was like a kind of, buy this book and you can see the landmarks in Manchester and London and the UK that were referenced or are important to the Smyths. And so that book was launched in London. We played the show, and again they both came, and then I think Andy went back to his hotel, but we went out drinking with Mike Joyce afterwards. There were pictures of us, I think, on our website. There's a picture of Andy Rourke playing bass and me sort of singing. That was backstage, you know. And they were both really, really very, very nice guys. And it was kind of, it was a bit weird because, you know, we'd grown up and these were, you know, each of them were 25% of our idols. So we had 50% of our idols in a room, and they didn't disappoint. You know, they obviously should never meet your heroes, but these guys were great. And Mike was really funny and definitely the kind of guy you want to sort of go down the pub and talk, you know, football and music with. And it was very interesting because, and I think if anyone's listening to this now and kind of booing and hissing at the Mike Joyce thing, the legal stuff was either ongoing or had only just recently finished. And Mike still said, look, despite everything, I'd still take a bullet for Morrissey. And that stuck with me, despite everything, despite what he'd been called and how he'd been, you know, demonized by the whole affair. That Mike Joyce was still that kind of honest, you know, that kind of, just like Logan Roy in Succession, these people continue to take a bullet for the big guy, you know.
Yeah, I don't watch Succession, so I'm a bit remote on that one, bit remote. But yes, absolutely, and I got that feeling as well when obviously reading the non-tabloid analysis in and around the trial and since, that really the only member of the band that was throwing out spike balls was Morrissey. Which was a shame, but at the same time, again, you know, yet again, he's fallen in and out of love, for example, with the NME. So
yeah.
If he happened to have fallen out of love with the NME at that particular time, you couldn't trust the NME necessarily to be depicting what Morrissey was saying accurately. So in the end, you either delve much deeper or you just walk away from it and wait for it to calm down a bit. But yeah, no, absolutely. That must have been an amazing experience. And like you say, it must have been to have the drummer and the bassist in the same room as you when you're performing. You must be thinking, oh my God, no bump notes here, well, no forgetting the lyrics.
Yeah, exactly. It's an odd thing. I mean, you sort of, it's one of those things, I suppose it's all those steps that get taken that make the more remarkable things happen. They're a consequence of what came before. So they never cease to be amazing, but they're all part of that sort of journey upwards and onwards, you know. And yeah, yeah, it's quite something. And you know, Stephen Street often comes to our shows at the Half Moon Putney, and he's done things like where we've seen him at half time. He said, look, I would like to come on before you guys come on and vouch for you, because I really want to tell people, you know, what I think of you, how good you guys are. And that's really humbling and quite incredible. And yeah, that's kind of, that one still seems wow, you know. It's quite something. But you sort of, I suppose you think, well, okay, if this is the journey one is taken, you have to just accept that this you know, you're in the same room as these
Yes,
people,
of
you
course.
know, because otherwise you can't really progress. You'll be stunted by the inhibition of your surroundings, you know.
Absolutely. And when you've reached that point anyway, where you're absolutely confident in what you're doing, it's only a little short step, isn't it, away from just pushing them out a little bit, as opposed to those who aren't really practiced enough, and they're much more worried about, I haven't quite got in the groove yet. Whereas you guys are obviously in the groove anyway. It was just a case of being able to psychologically shift away from the fact that your icons were in touching distance.
And I find it really satisfying because of how we, because of the formation of it, because we didn't do it for the sake of a tribute, for being in a tribute band, and because we, there wasn't a risk to be taken, because what were we risking? Nothing. People were either going to like it and they weren't, and we wanted people to like it because we loved being on stage, so we just wanted to do more shows. But it has been it's gratifying that it's a kind of it's an approval of our approach to it, that because, for example, I'm not a slave to a predetermined move. I think because I grew up as a Smiths fan at that time, as you did, we were influenced. Our aesthetics and perhaps some of our sensitivities or what have you were shaped by that, because we're influenced by people that we admire. And so had the Smiths not happened, and I as an original musician had succeeded back then, people would have said he reminds me of Morrissey, because I think Morrissey shaped some of my my, my stage persona. Um, and so that's something that I've maintained here as well. I think I'm very fortunate that we're a tribute band that was born out of having absorbed the original band exactly at the time. And I've sort of sometimes said to people that if you just catch me in the supermarket shopping, I'm shopping like Morrissey. You know, I don't have to think about it. And I am, you know, I'm sure there are some people who will have a tick list and say, well, he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that, and where are the beads and where's the glasses and where's the flowers and all this kind of stuff. And for me, sometimes that they're the kind of, well, look, that's what you expect. And I quite like that thing where we play somewhere new, and our show's always two halves. So we think, right, in the first half, there's going to be a number of people who've seen us, so that's great. There's friends here, but there are going to be other people who are standing in judgment, and they're not waiting for you to fail, but a lot of people are ready to be disappointed, and I would get that. Even though I think when you come and see a tribute, I think there's a cast iron guarantee that a tribute always has to be excellent, because it's kind of built into it that there is an expectation that they won't be. And so, you know, just like you might see a band who's reformed and be disappointed, you know, that they are now simply just a load of old fellas churning the hits for the money, a tribute band have never got the luxury to do that. So I think it's always built in that a tribute band has to be excellent, because otherwise what is the purpose of them? So I always like that when we present our take on it, and then at halftime, you know, people have the drink, because you see the reaction in the second half where people lose themselves. They're like, okay, I get this now, and I loved it, and that's always really rewarding. And that's, so I like its validation of our approach to the tribute thing.
Yes.
You know, and I think we've always done it in a very kind of honest way. So when Stephen is vouching for us before, you know, we you know, on stage before we start a show, or we get any approval of, you know, Joyce and Rourke, and also Johnny, who knows us. I've got a copy of The Queen is Dead. A friend of mine who's a journalist, Rob Hughes, I think he was doing an interview with Johnny for Uncut, I think, at the time. And basically Rob got the photographer to pop out and get a copy of The Queen is Dead. I mean, obviously I already have my own, but basically he said, look, can you sign this to my friend Graham, because he's in the Smyths, you know, with a Y. Johnny did that. So I got this message, and it was a lovely message. I think that's also on the website too. So Johnny validated us, and subsequently Johnny has quite a few times now. I mean, I know there was something on Radio 6 of an adventure, and he named us. He actually named us personally. He actually mentioned us in glowing terms. And even very recently, when there was the whole Rick Astley thing, and he'd come out with the first thing, said, "This is both funny and horrible." He then, you know, subsequently said, "I have no truck with the tributes," and that was absolutely true, because he'd spoken of us in glowing terms. So that's lovely, and I just feel it's lovely because of the path that we took. We chose not to do the cliche stuff for tribute bands, not old guys with wigs.
Yeah, and that leads on to a whole number of questions, some of which actually, as it came into my head, you answered them anyway. It's interesting with Johnny's response to Rick Astley and the Blossoms was that he seemed to be most perturbed by the fact that he'd been with the Blossoms recently and they hadn't mentioned it. This is what he was sort of.
Yeah.
It almost wasn't like, you know, it wasn't a problem for me that you did it. It was a problem for me that you didn't tell me you were going to do it.
Sure.
Yeah. Going back to the gig that we saw you with, obviously you played The Queen is Dead, the 35th anniversary of the album in the first half, and then you did a whole number of popular Smiths, we call them Smiths tracks, which just, you know, just you got Panic, Shoplifters, The Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, This Charming Man, obviously How Soon Is Now, we talked about earlier. Do you change them? Are they songs that you think, actually, this is the audience, I haven't been here before, these are the ones perhaps we'll really get them going in the second half? Or is it just a case of how you're feeling, a mood, or, you know, do you sit down and really contemplate it? I mean, how does that work?
What happens when we've got the anniversary shows, and they're important because your promoters and your venues, they require something to hang their hat on, and so you need to give it a title, and we're in this anniversary sort of loop. So when we are playing a venue just once a year, and it might be just locked into what you'd say an anniversary show, then some of the songs are predetermined because you are either playing the album in its entirety or a good portion of them. And then there are certain songs that you have to play whether you like it or not, and that can run to quite a considerable list. So the show at Bridport was an example of that. Queen is Dead in the first half, but it's only 10 songs, so you needed a couple more at the end. And so we have the opportunity to put what we kind of call the kind of curator's choice in there. And then in the second half, again, there are certain singles that are going to be demanded of, and perhaps those songs now that are kind of more familiar with the younger generation, who are perhaps, well, I think there's two kinds. I've seen plenty of young people in record stores buying Smiths vinyl, so they're definitely buying the albums. But there is the Spotify, you know, playlist crowd as well. And even though it was interesting to see that songs like I Know It's Over are very high up on the list, you know that there are certain good songs like The Boy with the Thorny Side that is going to have a rapturous, or Big Mouth or what have you. So you have to combine the album with some of the hits, and then what we like to do is put a few in there that are personal choices, or just kind of, you know, we're going to want to put Girl Afraid in there. We're going to want to put, you know, This Night Has Opened My Eyes. We're going to want to put Suffer Little Children, and have that whole gambit, really. So it's the whole experience, because we're normally playing at a show about 25, 26 tracks. So we try and cover everything. We'll try and tick as many boxes as we can. And invariably someone will still come and beat you around the head, you know, afterwards, because you didn't play their personal favorite. But you can't please everybody any of the time, you know.
No, absolutely. I mean, we go and see another sort of band favorite of ours is the Wedding Present, and they very much got into the habit of doing anniversary tours for their albums. And interesting, they obviously play every track in order, but forgive me if I'm wrong, but you didn't play, you didn't play Queen is Dead in order, did you?
No. Now there's a reason. There's a couple of reasons we do this. One of them are tunings. The two prominent tuning, or maybe they are the only two, is F sharp and E. And if you would have these long gaps, because we're not a band that can have a guitar tech who can just hand the guitarists the next one and we're on to the next song. In a world where that was the case, we would do that. So you want to have a run of songs that are going to be in F sharp or E, for just to make the show move. But also, what works as an album listening experience in the home or you know, wherever you listen to the album, can be very different to how an album will play out live. So you might feel, if you are, when one is curating a set, you want to, typically what you want to do is have a number of sort of up tracks, get people going, and then get to a little introspective part, and then build it back up, and then get to a sort of crescendo. That makes for a really successful gig. And so when you're faced with some of the albums, the track listing that works in a domestic environment for listening to the album as an ambient listening experience does not translate live. And you think, well, look, there are just too many stop starts here, you know. So that's the decision we took. We had played and have played the Queen is Dead in album order, and we just felt that it didn't work as well, you know.
Yes.
You know, the way we presented it is that we had about 3 tracks before we got to I Know It's Over. And I mean, you sort of like a show would not finish with Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others. You want, the way we do it, you want to finish with, like, you know, an anthem like There Is a Light going into Big Mouth. It drives people crazy. So again, it was just that kind of, look, let others do that. We don't feel we need to do it. And if someone felt they didn't enjoy a show because of the way that we put the tracks together, we're sorry about that, but we've got an experience of some 800 gigs. We know what makes a great gig. Trust us. We'll curate it for you. It will make for a better live experience. And I know, yeah, I mean, I've gone to see Suede a few times now when they've done the you know, the albums as in the album order, and that's kind of fine enough. But it hasn't worked. Though, funnily enough, when we've done Meat Is Murder, that actually is an album that completely works as a live experience in it, because you start off with 4 high-paced tracks.
Absolutely.
And then you get to that joke isn't that funny anymore. Then you lift people up a little bit more. Then you've got the Beautiful Well I Wonder, and then you kind of hit them kind of losing themselves, and then the kind of, you know, the drama of Meat Is Murder at the end. That sort of works. Whereas the first album, when we performed that as well, that kind of was like, really, this would not work for a live show. So yeah, it's in our gift to curate the best live set for the best live show.
Yes. And next year you're doing Strange Ways anniversary tour, and one of our favorite songs is Death of a Disco Dancer. It's just a beautiful, beautiful song. Would you start thinking about the second half of the show sort of now or much later? I know you're starting it sort of quite early in the new year. I appreciate that.
Well, I mean, Death of a Disco Dancer is quite interesting, because there were certain tracks that we've had to not make our own, but, you know, you sort of take ownership in a sense of a live version of a song, which is what we've done with How Soon Is Now. And we did that also with Meat Is Murder, as is a very dramatic version of that. There's a tremendous guitar work from Andy on that. And we did a similar thing with Death at a Disco Dancer when we did the album a few years back in 2017. Now, we had this conversation. We've never, the fourth, we're doing the world premiere of Strange Ways Here We Come in full at Islington, January the 8th next year. It's the first time I think anyone has ever performed the album in its entirety, because we didn't, last time round, we copped out and didn't do Death at One's Elbow and Paint a Vulgar Picture. we still don't know how well that's going to be received. So, for example, we noticed recently we've done some shows that were Meat is Murder plus Queen is Dead, because we should have played Meat is Murder in 2020 and couldn't. Something got in the way. We noticed that a large number of people were completely uninterested in Rush Home Ruffians. They were going off to the bar, or they were going to the toilet, or whatever. It just, and you could see people's faces, they were literally waiting for the song to end. Well, that's interesting. You just, everything fell flat, and we were playing it, you know, to the usual standard of all the other songs, but it just was not. There'd be a few people for whom it means everything and it's their favorite song, but too many people were like, what's happening here? There's a massive distraction here. And this was happening at successive venues. And I don't know if that's going to happen with like a song like Paint a Vulgar Picture, which essentially is just a series of verses punctuated by some, you know, some great kind of guitar work. I know that there are people out there who've got that tattooed on their arm as their favorite song, but I don't know how that's going to work out sort of live. So that would be kind of interesting. So we've had the conversation about strange ways. Would it work in album order, or would it be curated? Initially, we had a conversation about this on Thursday at a show in Worthing in the dressing room, and we suddenly thought, actually, yeah, it probably will work as is presented in a live sense. So I'm looking forward to finding out if that's the case. You know,
again, forgive me if I'm wrong in terms of memory, but perhaps the Smyths had cottoned on to Rush Home Ruffians as well, because they used to blend it in with Rubber Ring, if I'm right.
Yeah, yeah,
Back in
maybe. Yeah, yeah, it's strange. It's really strange. Some songs just work live, and some don't. That's why, I mean, look, what existing bands, when they're touring a new album, they rarely play the whole album. It's only anniversary sets or bands that are original bands that are in the same sphere as the tributes, where they themselves are paying tribute to their own albums.
Yes.
Tend to do the anniversary shows, or they might do it, you know. I'm trying to think. I mean, Suede are interesting because they play both their anniversary shows of an album, and then they'll get tour a new album. But I know that, you know, if I think of contemporary artists, artists who are still living and putting out, you know, new material, like Gary Newman. So I'm going to go and see him on the Intruder tour in May next year. I'm not expecting he's going to play every track from Intruder. He will play several, and there will be some that are left back. And I think I know that's what happened with the Smyths when they went out on the, you know, the Meat is Murder tour. Every track was not played.
Yeah, and forgive me. I think I just remembered. I think it was Rush Home Ruffians was blended in with Marie's the Name, you know, Elvis's song. I don't think it was the intro to Marie's the Name, and then it went into that. I got that wrong. I have to apologise. Yeah, no, that is is interesting.
Yeah, it's what she said, Rubber Ring, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'm just thinking, you've obviously also made that transition, because it's interesting how you were talking about how in the 90s you formulated this a Britpop band, which, like you admit, didn't take off. So it ended up with you becoming the lead singer of the Smyths. But now you are formulating your own sort of independent solo career, where you write your own lyrics and you record your own stuff. So you've got Electronic Mechanica, who
Beautiful Mechanica.
Beautiful Mechanica. Sorry, and in essence, it's a very different experience, isn't it? To work with, and I've listened to Beautiful Mechanica, and it's a different experience. And when we talked about it initially, you sort of said it was that blend of Newman and the Cocteau Twins. So again, it's almost taking from the early 80s and sort of a bit of a darkness, because you can associate the Cocteaus and Gary Newman with that sort of it's interesting. There was a program on television over the weekend, and it was Prince who said about the Cocteau Twins, and he said that he didn't understand a word that she said, but I always ended up in a dreamlike state when I listened to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was part of it, because emotions, raw emotions, they're a feeling, and sometimes they are a feeling that are hard to sort of just describe. They are sensory or what have you. I mean, I was thinking both of those. I mean, what's common to both of them is the light and dark and the euphoria, because Newman, classic Newman, are those sort of euphoric anthemic choruses. You know, he's a great writer, very melodic, and it can be quite euphoric and quite, wow, life affirming and exciting and thrilling. And then Cocteau Twins are just on a different, I mean, a whole different plane. But it was always great fun back at the time seeing the journalists of Sounds, or, you know, Record Mirror or Melody Maker or New Musical Express try and describe a Cocteau Twins song or an album, and it was always words such as ethereal and you know, that I think that was probably the most common one, a sort of ethereal, but euphoric. And I've always said that at their best, the Cocteau Twins is the sound of falling in love. It's just this almost indescribable. It just, you know, they just release things into your bloodstream when you listen to them. Like, for me, and I think so. Just, I suppose that, so as a stage persona, just as a perhaps that Morrissey thing, in terms of that kind of the music that thrilled me, excited me, that switched me on, that made me at the age of 13 say I want to be a musician. They're the ones. They're my aesthetics, and they're the things that have come out sort of in my own sort of music making. And you know, I get excited by the sounds that Robin Guthrie uses for his, you know, guitars and what have you. And with Elizabeth Fraser, I think that's part of the genius that for the greater part of Cocteau Twins discography, the words are phonetic, and they're like kind of primal screams, or they are emotions manifested through the mouth, but they're not cloyed or tied down by saying anything. I just think that it's beautiful, and it adds to the genius of them. And I mean, I regard Cocteau Twins, I think, in the same way I regard them now. I always did, but I regard them now in the same way that perhaps people in the 80s regarded Velvet Underground.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I just think that these are that. They just create something that is greater than the sum of the parts that went into it.
It's very interesting as well, Graham, because if you look at, for example, a band like, I only found this out very recently, a band like Talking Heads, who again we adore, because he did the stage show, American, I can't remember what it's called now, but anyway, and he talks about how he was very much influenced in the late 70s by Dali. And Dali talked about the fact that we live in a world that doesn't make sense. Therefore, he wrote poetry and lyrics for music that weren't meant to make sense, because they were a reflection of that. And obviously that led to the Talking Heads album Stop Making Sense, but it also had songs like I Zimbra. And it's amazing how many actually art school musicians who really delve deep into the philosophy of art have been so inspired in when they created their bands. And so in terms of Beautiful Mechanica, when did you sort of think about formulating it? Where did you get the name from, and your inspirations other than Gary Newman and the Cocteau?
Because the journey to it was interesting, and it's very, very interesting, and it comes back to a meeting with Mike Joyce, and it comes back to an experience with the Smiths. So that night we went out drinking with Mike Joyce. He said to me, well, why'd you do the tribute? Why don't you do your own thing? And I said, Mike, we did, but we just didn't have your songs. But I had been, and Simon and me, we had been originally musicians. And I like the fact that a lot of people now know that I am both in, I mean, you call it the Smyths, but as Mike Joyce said, it's the Smyths, isn't it? Because it need an E on the end, and of course it's Smith's Toy Shop. So we're one of those clever tributes where you can go, well, you know, it's the Smiths, not this. No, they've got a Y, but it's the Smiths. I like the fact that a lot of I don't. You will not find me post about Beautiful Mechanica, my own work, on a Smith's Facebook or Twitter or what have you. People through the social media channels find me and then will send a friend request, and then that's fine. So there is a bridge if you choose to walk it between the two, but I won't sort of tell you that the bridge is there. But I like the fact people knowing that I am, you know, an original artist, because it validates further the tribute band, because I am not in a tribute band because it's all I can do. I'm in a tribute band because I want to, because I'm passionate about it. And it's part of my portfolio of musical experience that I provide to an audience. So that's the sort of thing. So what happened is I had a number of people kind of saying to me, why don't you do your own thing? And I explained that I had done the do thing, but I had done my own thing. And then back in 2010, it was a rare summer where we took several weeks off. And so I was just diddling around, I think, with GarageBand on an iPad. And whereas in previous sort of incarnations as an original artist, I'd always collaborated with somebody else, I found I was actually able to do this myself. So I put together a home studio and started writing and recording. I used GarageBand to start with, then Logic, and I was very happy with what was sort of coming out of it. So I've sort of done that, and I just worked at it very, very slowly, and you know, I think first couple of years I was just doing stuff on my own and posting on SoundCloud. Then I thought, well, let's do some shows. So I put together a live version of it. So the original version was myself with a guitarist and a keyboardist with backing tracks on an iPad. And that version went out and did about 30 odd shows, supporting the likes of Jesus Jones, Toya, Heaven 17. I mean, Jesus Jones, Heaven 17 several times. Spear of Destiny, done a number of shows with them. Nouveau Vague, Christa Bell. It's all on the Beautiful Mechanica website. Because basically the promoters that we weren't for the Smyths were very happy to allow, when they were putting on those artists, many at the same venues I was playing with the Smyths, they allowed me to be the support band. So I sort of slowly built it up. And now it's at a very exciting point where what happened last summer, obviously no gigs, couldn't do much. I'm lucky that I've built my home studio. I started working on a sort of solo album that would have just been a kind of low-key thing. I'd never done this before. I'd never sort of crossed that bridge to him, but I messaged Stephen Street and said, Stephen, I'm working on my solo album. Could you just give me some mix tips, just how you set your mixes up? And that's all the question was. And it's the first time I'd ever really introduced about my own music. And Stephen came back and he gave me the tips. He said, look, when you've done it, send it to me. I'll give you some feedback. And that sort of stopped me in my tracks, because I thought, oh, okay, this has got to be the best thing I'd ever done. Now, I was lucky that about 9 months previously, I'd worked with a friend of mine who was a brilliant musician called Martin O'Castley, who he himself had been signed to Warner's, I think, in the late 90s. and working with him, he'd uplifted my own sort of quality. Not only he'd brought out the best in my songwriting, but in terms of things we were doing in the studio and my own musicianship. So he'd sort of, you know, my boat had lifted up, you know, with the waters he brought to it, if that's the metaphor I'm looking for. But you know what I'm saying? He really uplifted me.
Yeah.
So I contacted Mike and said, look, let's form a bubble, because we've got this amazing opportunity. I want to now make the best Beautiful Mechanica album that's possible, and send it to Stephen and see what comes back. So we spent several months doing that. The result of it is the album that I've just recently put onto Spotify and Apple Music. So I did a couple of things. I've got a friend I work with who used to work with Cocteau Twins. She was part of their team. She'd heard previous Mechanica stuff, but she came back and said, I love this. And Stephen came back and was extremely encouraging, and he singled out 3 tracks, but he said, notwithstanding that these are my 3 favorites, you should be very, very proud of this work. So that was something of a sort of game changer. So I then started talking to my friend about what, you know, we could do with this, and whether, you know, I'd released my stuff previously, but this was the first time I thought this album deserves to have a label name on it, and I was going to hold it back. And then once my friend agreed that she was going to represent me, I wanted to put together the kind of the sandbox of things for her to be able to present, which was the best album I could possibly do. I've subsequently got a new single that I'm going to put on there, which is very radio friendly. The idea being that it'll be the entry into Beautiful Mechanica, so that if we get a plugger involved, if we get some plays on it, people can then go to Spotify and then discover the album. You know, photo sessions. So I've just done a recent one, and then put together a new live band, which will consist of live drums, live bass, live guitar, and with me probably putting the guitar down and being more of a frontman sort of for it. And for this to coexist with the tribute band, because the interesting thing is, firstly, because with the Smyths we've built something that is very, very important. But secondly, there are plenty of evidence now, or there are a number of musicians who are both original artists and are in tribute projects. And that's sort of my kind of goal too. So the eponymous Beautiful Mechanica album is on Spotify and Apple Music, and obviously I hope people go to it, will like it. If you like beautiful, ethereal, emotional, dreamy music, you know, then there should be plenty there for you. Like, if you're a Cocteau Twins fan or a Numa fan or a fan of 80s electronica, there's going to be plenty of reference points. You know, I think it's that sense of, just like with the Smyths tribute band, that it's a nostalgia, and it's a sort of it's an escape to a place that makes you feel comfortable, and that's the same thing I think with Beautiful Mechanica, that even though it is a new original band, it's a new nostalgia because it rekindles comforting things from the past musically, while still being its own, you know, own creature with its own aesthetics and its own identity.
And I think it's important to let
so it's
know.
weird that it came about through the tribute band, through a response to almost just being bored of people saying, why don't you do your own thing? And I had done my own thing. And the interesting thing now is that the Smyths tribute band came about when I'd gone as far perhaps as I could and had been disappointed by the music industry. So I then I joined the entertainment industry and became a stage performer.
Right.
And through that, I'm probably now closer to achieving my aims as an original musician than I ever have been.
Good.
And it's been a journey through the tribute band to do that. Yeah. That's why I like meshing the two things together, because they are important. And the fact that the original band that validates the tribute band, because it shows I can do both.
Absolutely.
And so the Smyths are born out of passion because I want to do it, not because it's all I can do.
Yes. And I think people need to also remember, if they're watching this, if you haven't got Spotify, you haven't got Apple, you can go onto YouTube because it's on there too.
Yes, I've made some videos of the tracks there too as well. Yeah, absolutely.
I went round a friend's house last week and introduced him to it, and he loved it. So you know.
Oh, well, that's lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, that's amazing. It's amazing, and to have that yin and yang for you as well, because it's inspirational to be able to go out and be so creative, but at the same time, it's also an amazing thing to be able to replicate what you really, really love, and to bring the two together as well. You know, is successful as Beautiful Mechanica become. Please don't give up the Smyths.
It's certainly not the intention. I think the portfolio. My wife described it as that it's just an example of a portfolio career, because that's what many people have that anyway. You know, that people have a few hats, and these are two hats worn with the same amount of love and passion. You know, it's not much. I mean, it's interesting because when I last did a show with Heaven 17, I was saying to Glenn Gregory that because he knew I was in the Smyths tribute, but obviously we'd done several shows, and he was very, very encouraging Beautiful Mechanica. And I said, but you yourself, because he's in a Bowie tribute, Holy Holy, as well as Heaven 17. So it is, and I believe that there's a Stone Roses tribute that are also have an original band. So the same guys are also making original music, and I believe it's been played quite a bit on Radio 6, and so I think that's really interesting. You know, the lines are blurred. It is not. It's all part of, you know, why would you not? And I just think it's that they're not mutually exclusive. You know, they're not. Rufus Wainwright, the Judy Garland concerts. You know, it didn't diminish his own work, and it neither were diminished by him doing that. It's all part of that portfolio as an artist. If someone becomes interested in me through Beautiful Mechanica, I hope that they're also going to be interested into that's interesting that he does the Smyths thing as well. You know, I would want that. I would want that. And what I like as well, the people who've started finding, you know, finding the Beautiful Mechanica things they're referencing the kind of reassuring Cocteau Twins elements. And I'm thinking, well, of course, you're a Smyths fan. Of course because I was a Smyths fan who, when I was listening to John Peel about that time, he was either playing a new Cocteau Twins or a new Smyths track. Either or was number 1 or number 2 of his festive top 50 or whatever, you know, of course. And it's actually been true with Gary Newman, because the number of people who had the same, you know, 3 posters: Gary Newman, David Sylvian, Morrissey, enigmatic, you know, unique sort of frontmen.
Yes.
So they're not mutually exclusive. It's that same world. So yeah, hopefully I'm creating new nostalgia.
Yes, and interesting, the correlation between all 3 is that they all left their bands, so to speak. GY Army, obviously Japan with David Sylvian, and obviously the Smyths. They all left them, and Morrissey, I should say, they left them fairly early and branched off to do the solo stuff.
Yeah. My branching off has taken 18 years. Making, but in terms of sort of where it's perhaps heading now and how close things might be.
Yes, fantastic. Fantastic, Graham. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for
the pleasure is all ours. You've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
My real pleasure.